Black Widow was fine. Not great, not even good, but not awful. In the bottom 5 MCU movies, which is a tier where I don't want to pluck my eyes out to prevent myself from watching. High praise, I know. But this movie could have been better. The movie's set between Captain America Civil War and Infinity War, and has Black Widow taking down the man responsible for the Black Widow program. My biggest issues with this movie are weird tonal imbalance, questionable protagonists, and an uninteresting villain. Look at the first Iron Man movie. Tony doesn't take anything seriously. Then his weapon mongering backfires on him and he gets a second lease on life. That movie had jokes, but it also had a protagonist grappling with the fact that his weapons were used to kill innocent families. That movie didn't have Tony making a funny innuendo seconds after he finds out his mentor is still war profiteering. It knew when to take itself seriously. From what we knew about Widow before this movie came out, she had a dark past. She killed people, probably some innocents. She was treated like a weapon. These were not happy fun times. When you try to give her own story, you might think it's doomed to fail, since an MCU movie is expected to have lots of humor. But Iron Man knew how to juggle that. Jessica Jones, some of the darkest stuff in the MCU, had funny moments, and it wasn't tripping over itself trying to do funny and dark at the same time. This movie, Yelena's understandably upset her parental figures only saw her as a mission, one they didn't want to do. Seconds later, Red Guardian mentions soaking his hands in urine to stave off frostbite. We find out Mommy Widow was complicit in the brainwashing of the widows seconds after, ew, my parents are talking about sex. I've got whiplash switching from laughter to tears. Since this movie can't juggle the funny with the traumatic, pick one. If you want to laugh riot, don't do a story about sci-fi sex trafficking and parental abandonment. Look at James Bond. Most of those movies are pretty light. Do a Bondian spy thriller. An Agent Widow left for dead because she didn't have a choice is alive and causing problems, and she has to clean up her mess. This would still have some substance, but it's not so emotionally devastating as child abandonment and slavery. Leave the Red Room out of the movie and lean into an aspect inherent to her character that hasn't been explored much in the MCU. Many people praise this universe's diversity of genres. World War II films, fantasy space films, heist movies, coming-of-age movies, but Black Widow's a spy. This would be a perfect time to do a spy thriller, and not just with the action scenes, but for the plot as well. If you want something closer to the plot of this movie, don't try to do the ha-has. Commit to the tragedy of Natasha's life and what her family went through. A board of directors probably has a pie chart that says they'll get a 12% higher gross if they put in humor, but this is the 24th movie in this juggernaut of a franchise, and despite the downturn in quality, it's showing no signs of slowing down. It's okay to take risks when you're over 20 films in. If somebody says, I don't like this, I want funny superheroes, then you've still got 900 Marvel movies a year. They can latch onto one of those. Let this be the outlier where the story matches the somber tone. This movie's choice to be about family was a gigantic mistake. When I first heard Natasha was getting her own movie, I assumed she'd find out the Red Room resumed activities, they've got a new star pupil they've turned into a weapon, and Widow tries to save this girl she sees herself in. She encounters resistance because New Widow believes in what the Red Room is selling her, and sees Natasha as a threat. That's what the movie did, but the plot takes a backseat to the family stuff, which is where the movie is at its weakest. None of these supporting characters feel fleshed out. Red Guardian is the comic relief. That's it. Evie loves her children, but was complicit in their brainwashing and probable torture. Yelena is tough as nails, and she likes vests. Having her appreciate the things she didn't have when she was a widow is a good step, but I don't know much about her. The movie says the widows don't have to be killing machines and can do whatever they want with their lives. I need to know what Yelena wants to do with her life. What makes me care about her beyond a broken familial relationship with another character I barely know anything about? Remember when Yelena fantasized that Natasha married a guy from Ohio? Natasha could have told Yelena what she imagined Yelena doing with her life, and Yelena can say, oh yeah, I love the idea of marrying some no-name YouTuber who's a big X-Men fan from the American Southeast. You know? The movie wants to be about family, but it doesn't have enough time to get into the dysfunctionality and deal with the resurrected widow program. When Nat and Yelena first meet, Nat says she didn't think Yelena ever wanted to speak to her again. What? Can you elaborate on that? This was probably the movie's way of explaining why we'd never seen Yelena before, but this is a golden opportunity for character building. Is Natasha the kind of person to leave her partner in the dust? Maybe she did it to save other people, and her sister suffered the consequences. That would be an example of plot going hand in hand with character. This could have done more than one thing. Explain why we've never heard of Sis, and set up the theme that Nat did something to ruffle Yelena's feathers, and will have consequences she will have to deal with in the here and now. But no, we have to get to the dizzying action scenes. When your parents give you to a guy who treats you like a tool, and they claim they didn't ever love you, it's gonna take a lot more time to unpack that than one scene. Yes, one scene. Nat, Yelena, and Red Guardian talk with Mom, they yell at each other, then Dracov's people capture them, Then the rest of the movie is action scenes, and now everybody's cool with each other. I'm not sure why the movie did try to half-butt the family stuff, because Natasha and Yelena aren't related in the comics. Yes, I know they're not blood-related here, but they were raised together in the same house. They might as well be actual sisters, where in the comics they weren't connected, beyond both being products of the Widow program. I don't even think they met until they were both adults. You very easily could have done what I said earlier. Nat is laying low, finds out someone not connected to her has been taken into the Red Room, she tries to save her, and it could still be a personal story without them being sisters. In fact, if she's just trying to save one widow instead of an army, you could probably scale the gigantic Sky Headquarters explosion finale down a little, and it would feel more powerful, since Nat is just trying to save this one person that we've kind of gotten to know over the course of the movie, and not an entire army we know nothing about. If you wanted this to be about family and keep 98% of the movie the same, there's a way you could do this. Say Red Guardian and Rachel Weisz were duped by Dreykov. He sold them on making super soldiers who can protect their country. They're on board with that. Then he stabs them in the back to use their daughters for his program. After they spring Red Guardian from prison, he complains about Dreykov betraying him. It's just that he willingly turned his daughters to Dreykov and admits he never cared about them. Don't do that. Have him be a victim. But as far as Nat and Yelena know, their parents willingly gave them to the Red Room, which explains their hostility in the present day. If you do this, instead of Dreykov chemically subduing his widows, you should go with psychological brainwashing. Not only does this fit with him manipulating Red Guardian in the past, but it's more interesting than magic juice make your brain no work good. Speaking of Dreykov, he's tied with Malekith for being the most boring villain of the MCU. I've heard people argue villains don't have to be sympathetic, and they don't, but I at least need to know why they are doing what they're doing. This movie's doing a take that at Harvey Weinstein, and anyone who demean women for their own pleasure. And nobody's trying to humanize Harvey Weinstein, but this is fiction where I want the bad guys to have dimension. I don't need to sympathize with him, but I need to know about him. That's difficult when you see him for about 15 seconds at the very beginning of the movie, then we don't see him until the finale. What does Dreykov want? Beyond controlling the Black Widows, world domination might be the most generic character motivation ever. What if he wants to borrow the plan from the Man Who Knew Too Little and reignite the Cold War so he can sell the services of his widows to the highest bidder? Doesn't make him especially interesting, but at least his plan is more involved than showing a PowerPoint to Natasha. Maybe he lost his daughter and he feels a paternal kinship with the widows. What if Dreykov wasn't the bad guy, but it was another widow? If the widows were indoctrinated with propaganda, one of them might believe in what they're doing, and she doesn't want Natasha taking away her family. See, it all comes back to family. Natasha is what it's like to be free from this life. The villain doesn't want to be free, and Yelena could be caught somewhere in the middle. This movie tried to do two things and ended up failing at both. If it had focused on just the family angle or just the supervillain plot, I think it probably could have been a decent film, but it just couldn't pull off the multitasking. But I think without really changing much of the movie, it could have still been about this family coming together against a more interesting villain and liberating the victims of the Red Room. It was just a couple of really bizarre blunders that kept this from being better. Anyway, that's all I have. What did you guys think of this one? I hope you liked it, and if you did, I do these videos all the time, so check me out in the future to see what else I might do. Until next time, have a good one.